Hey everyone! Now that the armored car figures have been painted, it's time to build the vehicle. The build starts with the interior. Here are the parts that are needed. The parts fit together quite nicely, and together with the other interior colored bits, they all got a light gray primer. The instructions call out flat white for the interior. I chose to use aged white. I like the look of the slightly off whites for whites, especially so in vehicles that see a lot of use. The main 37mm gun needs to have the gun parts painted gunmetal. So I started by giving them a black undercoat before painting the gunmetal on the top coat. I have found that a black undercoat really helps metallic looks look metallic. The final touch for the interior is to paint any bits that are open to the top of the vehicle in the camouflage color, which for this armored car is US olive green. Using bits of index card to keep the overspray off the interior walls, I just sprayed the whole floor. Now that we have a clean, pristine looking interior, it's time to grunge it up. I mean, who has time to wash out the interior of a fighting vehicle in the middle of a war? I used a brown enamel wash from Tamiya. It looks really bad going on, but give it a few minutes to stain the paint. And then come back with a thinner dampened brush and cotton buds to remove the surface enamel, leaving the brown enamel paint just down in the panel recess lines and leaving a slightly stained look to the flat surfaces. At this point, I've painted up all the little bits and bobbles on the interior tub, that's the bottom half of the tank, and so now we can just attach the top half and seal it up. Next up is the drivetrain, axles, suspension, and exhaust. Basically, everything that goes on the underside of the vehicle. I won't bore you with all the fiddling I had to do, but the instructions do a great job of outlining what goes where and when to install what. Just remember that there are 2 axles in the rear of this armored car. I will say the kit has a lot of bits underneath, and everything is set up for all the wheels going perfectly straight. There's no option to have the front wheels turn so the vehicle can be parked going left or going right. I'm assuming that if you really want to do that, you would have to cut some bits and get the alignment bits such that the wheels could then be placed in that position. I'll just leave them going straight. While all the small bits are having a little bit of time to cure, it's time to get working on that turret. Work begins with building up the interior turret bits, including suspended seats for the commander and gunner. There are ammo racks and radios to set onto the turret ring. I pre-painted these so that I didn't have to reach into the little spaces to paint them later, and all that gets glued onto the bottom of the opening of the top turret. The main gun and the coax 30 cal fit into the mandolet, which fits into the opening of the turret. There really isn't much vertical play in the gun as the kit's designed, so I chose to glue it into a level position. But that's not necessary. You could leave it so that it can go up and down, but it just doesn't go a whole lot. There are some equipment holds that were welded to the outside of the turret, and while much of them will be covered up by the bedrolls and rucksacks, they do function as location markers on the model, as well as the ring for the 50 caliber Browning anti-air gun mounting point. Just check that your vehicle that you are building would have had that option on it, because initially they were not built with any air protection. This was a welded on option later in the war. Like after they came into Italy, they figured out, hey, these things are vulnerable to airplane attacks. Painting time. To preserve the interior painting that we did earlier, I'll just stuff the body and the turret with paper towels. Everything got a coat of black primer to afford some pre-shading. I then came back with some white primer and drew a bunch of random squiggly lines onto each of the panels. This will help to break up the solid camo color, and don't forget to do the turret as well. Speaking of top coat colors, the instructions in the painting guide call for Federal Standard 34084, or flat olive drab. But that is actually the Army Air Force drab, and it's a little on the brown side, as you can see here where I sprayed the underside to see if it was the right color. I found that Federal Standard 34088 is more likely the green drab that they should have called out. I pre-painted the wheel hubs and left the brown drab on the underside. The wheels were super glued in place, just easier than sanding off the paint. Note that the wheels have to be put on before the side fenders, so I painted the entire bottom half of the armored car and the underside of the fenders, as well as all the suspension parts that had a different color. And then once the wheels were applied, I then added the fenders over them. A light color coat was carefully applied to the top. I know in the video it looks the complete wrong shade. Partly that's because of the blueness and the lighting that I use. It's a bright LED blue, but let it dry and it will darken up. The bags and stowage all started with painting the leather straps a leather brown and taking all the edges and painting them in a khaki color. Now I didn't really worry about staying in the lines so that I could bring the main color up to those edges and make a crisp demarcation line. A gloss coat and an oil wash of black paint will not only bring up the details, but will pull all the colors together. And so after doing all that black bombing, that's when I realized that I had forgotten to add the decals. There aren't many decals, but the one that gave me the most trouble was the big star inside the circle on the back of the engine air intakes. It comes in 3 parts, but the instructions on how to apply these are not really clear. I monkeyed around with those 3 parts for a while until I got something that looked about right, but I'm not entirely sure I got them perfectly correct. If I need to do decals like this on future projects, I will probably make stencils and just paint the markings on. So with the decals settled as best I could get them to settle on these complicated 3-dimensional parts, I put a second gloss coat over them, not only to protect the decals, but to get us to the weathering stage of the vehicle. I started with a combination of brown, yellow, and white pastel chalk, mixed them together with some odorless thinner to make a textured wash. You could call it a muddy textured wash. I kept this wash to the lower parts of the car, but mostly on the wheels and tires. Make sure you only leave the wash on the treads, as the part of the tire that hits the road would stay clean on dry roads, as the road would slough off the dirt. After the dirt wash is dry, it's time to give the armored car an overall dusting. I like my diorama machines to look used, not factory fresh. So I started by making a pale gray pastel chalk from gray and white and a little yellow. I used that to dull down the green color and to make it look like she's been driven on unimproved roads. From my limited research, the M8 did not fare well on off-road performance and was way undergunned by the time the US got into Europe. Therefore, it was mostly used as a recon scout car on paved and dirt roads or back roads, and thus the overall road dirt look. Anyway, that's the main build done and dusted. Next time, we'll build a simple dirt road base and set the scene. Until then, happy holidays.